Joining us on 710 KURV, a law student from Boston College Law School, visiting fellow at Independent Women's Law Center, and a contributor at Young Voices. The topic, civil asset forfeiture. She's got an opinion piece at the Daily Caller titled, "The DOJ Running a Side Hustle to Pad Its 2024 Budget." I love that headline. Jill Jacobson joins us now on your 956 Drive Home. So what's the story here?
Hello, thanks for having me. Yeah, so in this piece, I identify a phenomenon, what I think is a problem, where Congress has now allowed the Department of Justice and by proxy all federal law enforcement agencies to profit off proceeds from civil forfeiture, actually augmenting their budget beyond what comes from the Treasury during the normal budget appropriations process.
So what is this process, and why is it legal? How does it work?
Yeah, so the appropriations process, what they call the regular order, is when Congress provides an agency with a budget for the year. It comes directly from the Treasury. There is an amount, there are specific purposes that the funds are to be used for. This is so that there's transparency and accountability for the way that taxpayer funds are used. And it's also so that Congress maintains some degree of control, right, over agencies. They can't just run free and do whatever that they would like. But they have allowed the Department of Justice to keep the profits from civil forfeiture. So when they seize property through the civil forfeiture process, which I'm happy to talk about, they're allowed to auction it off and keep the money that comes from it towards their budget. The rationale is an eat-what-you-kill mentality. We want to incentivize law enforcement to go after crimes, particularly drug crimes in this case. And so they're allowed to keep as a reward the property that's forfeited in the process of stopping those crimes. But part of the problem, while that seems like a good idea in theory, in practice, economic incentives when it comes to preventing criminal activity isn't always the best idea, because when law enforcement is pursuing crimes that result in forfeitable property, that means that by default, they're abandoning the pursuit of stopping some other crimes, notably violent crimes that don't result in forfeitable property. And that's a big concern for our safety.
Joining us on 710 KURV, Jill Jacobson, who has an opinion piece in the Daily Caller, the DOJ running a side hustle to pad its 2024 budget. Davis Rankin, your question. Go ahead.
The forfeiture I'm familiar with is less some guy caught with lots of money or drugs and loses everything. It's somebody stopped, not necessarily by a federal law officer, by state or county, and they seize whatever it is, and then the owner has to prove that it's not the proceeds of crime. What do you know about that, and how prevalent it is?
Yeah, so that's precisely how the civil forfeiture system works at the federal level as well. When a federal law enforcement agent suspects that property has been used in the commission of a crime, whether or not, in fact, that property was used in commission of a crime, they seize it, and the onus is on the property owner to go into court and prove that they're innocent in order to get their property back. The big problem with that is these are often small amounts. These are everyday Americans. It's a few $1,000s in cash. At times, it might be their car. And the cost of an attorney to go in and prove your innocence is very, very expensive. So the overwhelming majority of the time, the property owners will just concede and let the federal agents keep their property, which they're now profiting from sort of at the expense of all of us, which is concerning from a democratic perspective, too.
I've seen stories. Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
I just assume the people who get stopped are either poor or black or Mexican American or something other than white Anglo-Saxon, and but is that true, or is this stuff tracked?
Yeah, there have been a few studies, namely by the Institute for Justice, that show that civil forfeiture overwhelmingly affects minorities. It affects people without economic resources to go in and actually fight these things, which is a really unfortunate part of the problem as well.
Well, wouldn't it be
Jill
if they
Jacobson
seize?
has an
I'm
article
sorry.
at the Daily Caller joining us on 710 KURV. The DOJ is running a side hustle to pad its 2024 budget. One of the reasons why we thought this was a very fascinating topic, aside from its intrinsic value, is that we had a couple of stories recently where it was a guy with a duffel bag full of money. And admittedly, we didn't get a whole lot of details on where the money came from, but it was a duffel bag full of money in the trunk of his car. And he got pulled over, and the money got seized, because why would an average everyday citizen have money in the trunk in a duffel bag? And it was I don't remember how much it was. It was tens of thousands, if not about 100,000 or so. But if I'm an innocent person and I have that much money in my car, is it always the first instinct for law enforcement to think that this is illegal money?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately it is. There are many cases. I would suggest that anyone who's interested in this topic read about Crystal Starling in New York. She had her entire life savings taken purely because her boyfriend at the time was accused of a drug offense, and he was later exonerated. So she was guilty by association. And yes, purely because she had cash in her apartment, it was suspected of criminal activity and seized by agents. So that is certainly the presumption. And, you know, this is not to say that in some cases it's not true, right? There are many times where individuals carrying large amounts of cash is a sign that something is perhaps going on that's nefarious. But in those circumstances, we use the criminal forfeiture system. They're formally charged, and those assets are seized as part of their conviction. Civil forfeiture is maintained for those who are not convicted of a crime, and that's the really anti-American troubling part.
Davis Rankin, go ahead.
Well, how come this has been if I say hobby horse, that diminishes it, but this has been an issue with me for a long time. I had an uncle, may he rest in peace, who was a gambler, and he carried a lot of money, a lot of cash. Wasn't stolen, but he was never stopped and had that stuff confiscated. What I keep asking is, how come criminal stuff seems a world apart from what I'm talking about, which is the civil stuff, and how come nobody's doing anything about it, and how come there hasn't been a civil rights case that would get a definitive ruling from the Supreme Court?
So there actually has been a lot to push back against civil forfeiture. As I mentioned, the Institute for Justice regularly takes on victims of civil forfeiture and helps to get the money back. And there are bills almost every session in Congress trying to get something passed to reform it. You all can look up the FAIR Act if you're interested, but there are serious financial motives at stake. You know, like I discussed in the article, the Department of Justice predicts that it will generate $1.3 billion from civil forfeiture this year, which it uses to do everything from run its programs, paying for arms, building prisons, all sorts of things that federal law enforcement now really depends on this revenue. So there's a big financial incentive not to reform the system, unfortunately, to the detriment of all of us.
So the big shots know that this is essentially a shakedown racket, or a good percentage of it is ill-intended and thus ill-gotten gains. You're saying they know this, but they don't do anything about it?
There are unique instances in which civil forfeiture is actually really helpful. I'll give you an example. If someone has done something fraudulent, if they have ripped a lot of people off and they've passed away, right, the government couldn't bring a criminal action against them because they're not alive anymore. We can seize their property through civil forfeiture to compensate the victims. So, but that is a very, very unique situation, and it doesn't reflect the reality on the ground. You know, the reality is that this is impacting everyday Americans. The big shot criminal who is no longer around is few and far between, but, you know, a lot of lawmakers hold on to this hypothetical to justify the entire system when it's really out of step with reality.
Any final thoughts, and where can we find your article at the Daily Caller? Or, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I post all my articles. I'm Jill C. Jacobson on Twitter, and I'm a fellow at Independent Women's Forum. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a great topic.
Hey, appreciate your time here with us. Hope to talk again soon. Jill Jacobson. Check out the article at the Daily Caller. The DOJ running a side hustle to pad its 2024 budget. You're listening to News Talk 710 KURV, your 956 drive home.